Hello, welcome to a new episode of Plan C, Ocean Interventions to Address Climate Change. As always, I'm your host, Will Burns, Co-Executive Director of the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal at American University, and I'm joined by my co-host, Anna Madliner, MRV Manager for the Carbon to Sea Initiative. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Will.
We're joined today by the CEO of Planetary Technologies, Mike Kelland, as well as Planetary's Chief Ocean Scientist, Will Burt. Those who listen to Plan C will recognize that Mike is our first return guest. Planetary is a Canadian startup that's been working on ocean alkalinity enhancement in Halifax, as well as growing it in other locations. And Mike last joined us in May 2023 when we discussed both the scientific basics of ocean alkalinity enhancement as well as Planetary's plans for conducting research in Cornwall in the United Kingdom. Well, a lot has changed since then, and I'm excited to have this first 1 year or maybe 1.5 year later check-in with one of the most prominent marine carbon removal startups. Planetary most recently received an $11.5 million Series A funding tranche, which is notable in the current financial climate for CDR and Climatech more generally. What are you excited about in this episode, Anna?
I am particularly excited to be able to do this first almost 2 year later episode and share with our listeners how much can happen in that time frame in the marine carbon removal world. The Carbon to Sea initiative has increased the partnership with Planetary during this period, actually, with a joint learning opportunity which was announced this summer, where we are funding additional science to be carried out during Planetary's 2024 trial in Halifax. As the Carbon to Sea initiative, we are working continuously to establish these kinds of partnerships that really help advance research while maintaining high accountability. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from Mike and Will about that partnership, as well as all their other partnerships that enabled this field trial. And in today's episode, I'm particularly keen in discussing and sharing with the world how Planetary is really one of the first companies that is truly operationalizing a site, which is really no small feat. And I've heard Will talk a lot about, inviting people to come to Halifax to look at it. It's taking place in the real world. And that said, as always, lots of scientific, social, legal challenges that remain to be solved, and we'll have lots of new insights, I think.
All right, so should we engage with our guest, Anna?
Yeah, let's do it. Hi, Mike. Hi, Will. So good to have you back.
So good to be here.
Great to be here.
Yeah. We're excited. Let's kick us off. For new guests who perhaps haven't listened to the first episode we had with Mike, would you mind introducing yourselves again? Both Mike and Will, and Will share a little bit of your journey into the CDR world for those that haven't heard it.
Yeah, I mean, the company has changed so radically since we met like 1.5 years ago and talked about this that I would say if you haven't seen the first one, that's probably a good thing. Let's start from scratch. So maybe I can jump in and talk a little bit about the company and where we are and what we do. And then I can hand it off to Will to talk about how he came into the space and, sort of became such a leader in the world of OAE. So Planetary as a company, so my name is Mike Kelland. I'm CEO, co-founder of Planetary. We do what I think is probably the simplest thing in the world to take excess carbon out of the air and safely store it away from the atmosphere. And the way that we do that is that if you think about the ocean and the atmosphere as kind of like one system, and I know for your audience, Will and Anna, describing OAE is probably not entirely required, but I'll give you my spin on it because it sort of feeds into how we think about it. But if we think of the ocean and the atmosphere as kind of one system when it comes to CO2, so we know that a quarter to a third of our emissions every year dissolve into the ocean and are buffered from the atmosphere that way, and we think of those as sort of part of the same system. We as that CO2 dissolves into the ocean, it actually creates, ocean acidification. It's essentially an acid. And, the perspective we have is that, the simplest and easiest way to deal with extra acid within a system is to neutralize it with an antacid, right? Fundamentally, I mean, that kind of makes sense. We have a stomach ache, we have an antacid, we have a major industrial acid spill, we use a base in order to clean that up typically. And so that's essentially what we do. So we go and we add an antacid through existing infrastructure, wastewater plants, power plants, and things like that, in order to clean up that acid within the system. We get our antacid, our alkalinity, from existing industrial byproducts around the world. And so there's a lot of different industries that produce essentially rock. They produce sort of like waste rocks of various different kinds that are processed in a way that we can extract the alkalinity out of it. And we have a patented process to use these byproducts and wastes in order to extract the alkalinity while leaving behind all of the sort of impurities and things you don't want to put in the ocean. And we deploy that at these different facilities, and we operate within existing permits, existing wastewater, existing power plant, cooling loop permits, in order to essentially neutralize that CO2 in the ocean, and take that CO2 out of the ocean atmosphere system as a result, storing it essentially as a carbonate salt, which is the building block of marine life within the ocean for about 100,000 years.
Great. Well, let's have you introduce yourself, and then we'll take apart everything that Mike just said and dive into the detail.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Will. I am the chief ocean scientist at Planetary. My background is in oceanography. My backstory, or I should say, first, my role in the company is really to sort of lead our internal science team, and also to build the academic collaborations that are so important at in all of our projects, and to sort of help educate the broader public about what this is and why we're doing it and why we believe in it. So my pathway is kind of a fun one. So in late 2021, I was an assistant professor of biological and chemical oceanography at University of Alaska in Fairbanks. I was actually prepping lecture material for my grad level chem oceanography class when I got an email from a friend who was working on this new project with Planetary. She said they needed someone to come in and accelerate their science. So I looked up the company and was just completely, as my mother would say, gobsmacked. That I had never heard of OAE. I'd never heard of Planetary. And so when I got on the phone with Greg Rao, one of the co-founders, I said, whether I get this job or not, I've got 2 weeks of lecture material lined up that I didn't have before, because this stuff is incredible. But 3 weeks later, I had the job, and I never even taught that course, because 6 weeks after that, my family, my kids, my wife, we'd packed up everything in Alaska and had moved home to Canada. And totally uprooted, our lives. This was an opportunity I just couldn't pass up. And it's been I actually looked at the email just today. It was almost exactly 3 years ago that happened. And I couldn't be happier with that decision. So it's been pretty cool.
I've heard you give that background story a couple of times, and I always learn something new I did not know about the lecture material, for example. Okay, great. So back in May 2023, when we recorded the first episode with you, you were in the process of reverting all of your focus onto the Halifax site and away from the Cornwall site. So if you could take us a little bit on a throwback tour, what that 1.5 year looked like. Of course, you already alluded to some of the developments that took place, but if you recall, we spent a lot of time in that episode discussing the community outreach at the Cornwall site. So I think it's worth rolling up the sleeves again and giving a bit of a past story.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll give you sort of the high level bullet points, because there's so much that's happened in the last year and a half, like in terms of progression of the business and progression of the technology and the science as well. OAE is just growing at such a tremendous rate in terms of all the papers that are coming out right now and all of the sort of the knowledge that's being grown in the space. So it's really exciting. our contribution early on. So Cornwall was a really interesting experience. Project's currently on hold with us. We're seeking an alkalinity source that makes sense in the region. But the very first trial there, so we did our research with Plymouth Marine Labs and Southwest Water in 2022. And I think we spoke about that at the time. That was the very first time that wastewater-based OAE has ever been deployed that I'm aware of in the field. And so we did that. The outcome of that was really interesting. So since we spoke, there was a paper that was led by Vaskitidis out of Plymouth Marine Labs. He got that published in Nature Communications, Earth and Environment about OAE, about that trial, really specifically about that field trial and that work. And the conclusions, I think, were really interesting. Highly recommend everybody take a look at it. Will and I did a little video about it on our website. But really, it's, the big thing for me was, we were able to detect a signal, which is really cool because it was very, very small. But the thing that Vas took away from it is the reversibility. So often we talk about, MCDR writ large and all these kinds of things and, sort of like bundle it all together. But OAE is actually a really specific pathway where what we showed in that, at least at the small scale that was there, that it's kind of like when you stop it, it stops. This isn't something that, shows any kind of memory within the system. There's no sort of runaway effects or impacts within that kind of dosing process where, within a very short period of time of sort of turning off the system, there was no measurable impact to the local ocean chemistry. And it had, completely gone to background and dissipated. So I think from a safety perspective, some of the conversations we have, some of the messaging, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding that, you'll have some sort of major irreversible impact if we go ahead and do some of this research or some of this work in the field. And that paper was really good about sort of showing that really wasn't the case. It's sort of, turn it off and it stops kind of thing. The other things that happened with us, like I say, we've taken a pivot away from, I think probably at the time we were talking about electrochemistry and mine tailings as our feedstock source. We've really taken an approach which says, look, there's a real abundance of byproduct alkalinity that's out there. And so we've patented a process that, like I say, extracts pure alkalinity from those byproducts directly and leaves behind the heavy metals, any of the impurities, things like that. So that's a sort of a big innovation for us and really has launched us forward in a very significant way because it's reduced the capex of our project, the time to launch, as well as improved a lot of the siting and ability to run a economically viable project in a lot of different regions. We've brought Halifax into fruition, as you said. So last year delivered tons. I think we're going to talk about that in a sec, but really exciting that we were able to deliver net removals with that project. And we have an impact report that we've published on our website about that system and that project in 2023. Moving into 2024, obviously, we've continued to work on that project. And we've got we've been named top 20 as the X Prize finalists, which is really exciting too. So that's coming up in April that the big grand prize will be awarded. And I guess the final thing is, we've announced two other projects, which are research collaborations with different universities. And so on the Elizabeth River in Virginia, we've got a collaboration with the University of Maryland that's funded by NOAA. And we've got a collaboration with UBC or the University of British Columbia and Ocean Networks Canada and Metro Vancouver out on the West Coast. That is an ongoing research project as well. So a couple of different really exciting projects that we're looking at as well.
Amazing. Awesome. I'm going to really hone in on this aspect of building up the field site. I've heard Will talk a lot about what it took to operationalize a field site and to really get it going. And I think that's one of the big advantages and opportunities for you to share about as well. Mike, you already alluded to the numerous partnerships that really brought your site in Halifax to life. And I wonder if you could talk more about the role of those partnerships you already alluded to, but also really what does that field site look like? I recently had the opportunity to actually look at the site. It was really impressive to see OAE in action. It was awesome. And, take us on a little virtual tour of what happens on Tufts Cove.
Okay, I'll do my best. Should I start by telling you that it's like a very windy day because we're in Nova Scotia?
Make it picturesque, really visualize it. We can put in some recordings from the field site and
yeah, just put in some white noise because it can be very loud at times. Yeah, no, it's a really cool site. It's beautiful. It's right on the water in Halifax Harbor. It's right in the sort of central part of Halifax Harbor, and that's kind of worth noting, right? It's right downtown. Essentially, you're looking at the urban center of Halifax in front of you. We're on the site of a power plant. The power plant uses cooling water as part of their process, and that cooling water, takes essentially it's just seawater that's warmed up and sent back out into the harbor. And we are adding our alkaline slurry at the very end of that pipe. So we have our own little site, kind of on the outer perimeter on the edge of the Nova Scotia Power site. And it's a very small site, as I learned recently. The footprint of that site, relative to things like DAC and other types of carbon removal.
Direct air capture, DAC.
Yeah, direct air capture. Sorry. So, I call the site sort of a tank on a tarp because that's really all it is. And we use a tank to make alkaline slurry, and then we dose it into the end of the pipe. But there's a lot of other things behind the scenes that make it happen, obviously. And the partnerships and the collaboration is critical, as Mike alluded to earlier. So some of the really important partnerships, I would say there's sort of three critical partners that we've had to get us to where we are right now. The first one, in no particular order, is Dalhousie. So as you said before, it's an amazing multidisciplinary team. The industry academic collaboration, that term gets thrown around a lot, but what we've accomplished and how we operate is truly remarkable and incredibly unique. And I think, the Dalhousie folks would say the same. We have to collaborate really closely, but we also are very careful about being independent of each other in the way we communicate internally and externally. This has caused tons of tension over the last 2 years, no doubt. But there's an underlying trust between the two parties, and that has helped keep things together. So, it can't be overstated how important that is and how challenging it is to make it work effectively. Also give an important shout out to Carbon to Sea. So Carbon to Sea, the philanthropic organization that, is funding a lot of R&D and sort of advancement of ocean alkalinity enhancement. So they've helped fund the first iteration of our system that doses alkalinity into the pipe. So that's the Site Automation and Monitoring System, or the SAM system. And they've also found really creative ways of funding other elements of research, whether it comes to ecotox testing or speeding up publication of results through choosing the right journals. It's been really amazing to work closely with that team. And possibly the most important of all, Nova Scotia Power has been with us every step of the way. Whether site setup, sort of getting us on their site in an appropriate way, helping us troubleshoot issues on the ground almost every day, helping with communications, helping ensure operational safety. That might be the most important thing of all. They coordinate and partner on the countless site tours that we do, including the one we did with you, Anna, recently. So they have been remarkable, and those are critical partnerships. We also partner with local sensor companies. And here in Halifax, we partner with third-party labs to make sure our samples are analyzed promptly and independently. So there's a lot, and there's many, many more I'm not mentioning, but it's a pretty well-oiled machine at this point, but it's taken a while to get it going.
So let's talk a little bit about removals and removals to date. Acknowledging that you're absolutely correct. These things you were talking about, including the IP aspects and learning from other processes and not always reinventing the wheel, right, is a critical aspect, I think, for the industry in terms of keeping costs down and doing it right. But from a standpoint of actual removal of carbon, I remember last year that you said the company had removed about 4 gross tons at about 200 kilograms net. Could you update us in terms of where you are at removal now and how confident you are in terms of those estimates, and what else do you think needs to be done in that context?
Okay, so I'll certainly speak to the confidence we have in our removals. Mike, I'm not sure if you wanted to tackle the first part of that question.
Oh, sure. So we removed last year about 138 point what, Will? 138.7 tons? 138.7 tons. That's on a net basis. And so really exciting that we've progressed from 200 kilograms net to like 138.7 net. And so that was last year. I think the project went really well. We learned a ton. There's going to be a lot of different papers that come out of that project and sort of help to progress the field and all of the learning that we've had along the way. And with that process, I think we've also helped to progress some of the trust systems around MRV. So working with Isometric on the protocol and getting sort of the OAE coastal removals protocol out there. And then this year, our campaign is focused on getting to about 1,000 tons net throughout the course of this campaign, which is spanning a little bit of this year and into next year. So that's where we'd like to get to, and that's what we're targeting right now as our scale out.
Yeah, so those are the numbers. Didn't know you wanted to go to the decimal point, but I'm glad you did. We've gained a lot of confidence in the last year across all elements. But in terms of removal numbers, there's a few reasons why we should feel good about where we've gotten to. So the first reason would just be basic proof of concept, right? That's coming out of this field trial. So we're seeing evidence of ocean alkalinity enhancement in the field measurements. We're seeing the pH of the harbor near our site go up. We're doing that deacidification and we're measuring that. We're seeing the alkalinity of the harbor increase while we're dosing, and we're seeing that alkalinity go back down to baseline. When that discrete dosing ends. That may sound trivial to some people listening, but measuring ocean alkalinity is not that easy. And this whole idea of are you above baseline? How do you separate signal from noise? Like, we're doing that. So this year we're moving into making measurements of PCO2, or partial pressure of CO2 in air and in water. That's going to be one more step towards proof of concept. Measuring the gradient between the air and the water. That's what this scale of field trial can accomplish. So we're making those steps, and those are really, really important steps. When it comes to the modeling, we're using very high quality ocean models in Halifax. So the ROMS-based model run by Katja Fennell's lab at Dalhousie is focusing on the sort of near field removals. So what's happening in Halifax Harbor and the approaches to Halifax Harbor. That's a state of the art ocean model. As everyone loves to say, no model is perfect, but some are certainly better than others. So we can feel confident that we're getting good results from that sort of near field system. And then we translate the sort of the output of that near field model into a global model. In this case, we call it the ECHO model. It's an ocean state estimate. It was sort of outlined in a paper by Jing He and Mike Taika a couple of years ago, in the context of ocean alkalinity enhancement. So what I would say is that, it's an appropriate tool. There's no question in my mind that we're going to need to improve these tools over time in terms of the modeling approach generally. Lots of areas for improvement there, but we're using the best tools that we have at our disposal. And that provides us with the confidence we need to move forward. And the final reason we should feel good about those numbers is that they're conservative. So these are based on uncertainty, propagation, things like that. So for those sort of calculations that Mike, or those numbers that Mike gave you, that's a conservative estimate of net CDR. And how we do that is we take a mean estimate. So in this case, it would have been closer to 150 tons. So that mean estimate means you're 50% confident that the number is higher or lower than that number. It's the mean, right? 50-50. So what we do is we subtract one standard deviation of that based on our uncertainty propagation. So we take the uncertainty of all the things that we've calculated and all the modeling and all this stuff, and we subtract that. And now when you do that, you're now about 84% confident that the number you've calculated is going to be actually higher than the one you're reporting. So this in this case, that's about 11 tons that you're sort of losing out on potentially. But that's what conservative estimates are all about. So we feel good about that approach. Generally, that's what was outlined in our MRV that we published a couple of years ago. And yeah, so onwards and upwards.
All right, thanks for that. So okay, let me radically shift to some social science questions. Most notably, the issue of public engagement and social license to operate in this context. Obviously, there were some speed bumps in the context of the Cornwall project. There's been some suggestions of public resistance in the Loch Ness project that Woods Hole is working on currently. It seems like to date, there's been a different story in Halifax. And I wanted to tease out if you think that perception is correct. And is it attributable to things that you've done differently from a standpoint of public engagement, or is there some different cultural aspects that make that site more propitious? I think these are kind of important sort of lessons learned, right, as the industry moves forward. So I'm curious about your observations.
Yeah, I think you're correct, Will. This has been a fabulous story here in Halifax. It's been very successful, but just like I say, when it comes to parenting, you should take some credit for when your kids behave themselves. And the same goes here. We've worked really hard in order for this to be a success. So it's not down to any one thing or some element of luck. I think there's a lot of different things here, right? So on a basic level, committing outwardly to being transparent and following the science and inviting engagement has been a big part of that. There's a lot of examples on our website of our meetings with City Council, meeting with fishers and fisheries scientists. We meet regularly with Environment Canada and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We engage with local stakeholders like the local regulator. So there's all that work that goes in, but it's really, really important work. And Dalhousie, as our primary academic partner here, has been with us along the way, maintaining their voice in those conversations for sure. But the fact that we have clear evidence of how we're working with independent scientists is a big part of that. Now, we had, to some degree, we had that, in other sites as well. But it's a bit of a deeper connection we have with Dalhousie. We are a Halifax company. That is not unhelpful, right? This is our home base. I live here. I'm a Haligonian, and that no doubt is helpful when it comes to speaking to people. It seems now, moving forward, I would say, how this fits into the bigger picture is that this is a clear success story that we can now point to everywhere we go. And that it's not, I'm not talking about a success story in terms of social engagement. I'm talking about everything. So the effectiveness of the solution, we're measuring it. Here's the evidence. The safety of the solution, we're making measurements of ecological impact. We're not seeing anything major concerns there, and we have evidence. We're seeing oversight. We're seeing Dalhousie working hard, publishing their results. Independent. The regulators are documenting our work. The enforcement branch comes to our site and takes samples to make sure that we're compliant with the law, essentially. So there's evidence of all that happening, and those groups can speak to it. And we're seeing evidence in the economic development, right? The amount of money that's being generated by this work happening in Halifax, it's real dollars, and you can count that. So now that we have that, that's going to be important, because people in the past have sort of said, like, this is a completely unproven technology. And now it's, that's not quite true. There's some serious proof points here, and we should and will be able to replicate those, at our other sites.
And Will, I just want to make sure that you're clear about your analogy. You don't consider the community to be the child. You're talking about the project being the child that's behaving, right?
Yeah, sorry. Being a young parent, sometimes you try and throw child analogies out. Maybe that wasn't an appropriate one, but yeah.
No, but the project is, right? Like, the project is growing and it's developing. And I think that we do consider it kind of our baby. And I think that it's a good analogy to say that, as the project develops, it also takes on a life of its own. It embeds itself into the community. It embeds itself into the partnerships we have. It's not just our project, it's everybody's project. And I think that's really, really important that we do see it flourishing and growing in that way. And we have a big part to play, but there's a lot of other people that have a big part to play in this as well.
Yeah, and on one note of sort of public communication, right? You recently hosted a self-hosted, I don't know, a webinar about the trial, the results from the trials, and in particular, what you monitored, what you observed, and what worked. We don't need to go into too much detail given time, and given that you already did that webinar and it's publicly available for everybody to watch, including visual aids. But I wanted to perhaps maybe not even stress too much about the carbon quantification, because you've talked about it sufficiently and in many other places. But I wanted to follow up on the environmental piece that you've discussed in that webinar, which was that you observed or you monitored for particle accumulation on the seabed, risks for material impurity, changes in phytoplankton community. I wanted to get your perspective on why you chose to observe those parameters, whether that's because you expected something to happen or just to be safe, and also what your metric of safe or no impact is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think it's such a critical topic, right? I mean, we came out with a code of conduct very early on for the field, and our code of conduct is pretty straightforward. It's like, it's more principles based about how we do things, but it's really focused on having that responsible approach to the field and the development of the field. And we align with the B Corp standards and all of those kinds of things as we do our work, as well as we're building for the long term. And I think that's really a critical component of this. I think private sector is often seen as like, come in, grab a profit and go, but most companies that survive don't work that way, right? We have to think for the long term. And so when we develop our safety procedures and the work that we do that goes well beyond kind of the level of monitoring or the level of understood safety within the permits we're working on, we're going well beyond that. That's really a big component for us of complying with our own responsibility, our own ethics, but it's also fundamentally aligned with our incentive to build something that has long-term sustainability as a business and as an organization. But Will, you can probably answer all the more sort of detailed questions that Anne is asking about how we actually look at that biological safety.
Yeah, maybe I'll start by saying what I'll mention here is a small piece, right? We can't do it all. Our science team is like 3 people, right, on the ground here. So we do the things that we feel are the most important that we can achieve, and then there's whole other layers of research that are done by the academics to prove this out on a longer term. But the things we chose are, we chose them for a reason. So seabed accumulation is obviously super important from a logistical perspective. For those who don't go out on boats, it's not complicated. You collect surface sediment using a grab sampler. You do that before, during, and after some sort of trial. You analyze that material for the sort of metals inside that sediment. So if you're not seeing any change in the top centimeter or two of the chemical content of those sediments, the amount of metals in there, then you're unlikely that you're accumulating any of your feedstock on the seabed. I will also say, and this is quite important, I spent a chunk of my PhD working on what you'd call sediment water column interactions, and they are really complicated. So that complexity leads to uncertainty, both environmental safety uncertainty and for carbon accounting too. So we focus hard on minimizing uncertainty across everything. So for all these reasons, we are actively choosing feedstocks that dissolve quickly. Now, the feedstock we used last year, I wouldn't say dissolved overly fast. So that's why we focused hard on the sediment questions. But we know from the learning that we're doing that's going to be an important part of how we do things. So that's the sediment piece, now and in the future. It sounds sort of obvious almost, but understanding the material that we're adding is sort of the cornerstone of our ocean safety, right? The stuff doesn't always have to be super complicated. You have to understand forward and backward the stuff that you're adding. So you need to know how many metals are in that feedstock, and then you can make calculations about how many metals you will be adding. And if those amounts come into conflict with water quality guidelines near the pipe or far from the pipe, you don't use that feedstock. So we go out and we measure metals in the water and in the sediment, but that's almost a secondary thing because, we've done the homework on the feedstock itself. We're sending out this material, the materials we use, we send them out all over the world. Anytime someone asks me, hey, can I have some of that stuff to do this test or that test? I put it in a box, which not that easy to do, actually, sending this stuff around the world, but we do. That's ecotoxicology testing, that's mesocosm studies, looking for organic compounds that oceanographers like me have never heard of. Hyper diligence on feedstock sourcing is, can't overstate that. And then the phytoplankton work that I speak to in the webinar, again, I don't want to go into detail of it here because it's pretty complex stuff. But really, for last year, it was about looking at the phytoplankton community upstream of where you're dosing alkalinity and downstream of where you're dosing it, and looking to see if anything jumps out in terms of changes. That work's going to get published by our collaborators in the months to come, and folks can dig into the gory details. But those have been the three sort of critical parts of what we've done, what we did last year, anyways.
Okay, and your metric of safe is that you ideally do not observe any changes, or is there sort of a margin of operation that you consider safe enough, good enough to continue?
Yeah. So the clear hypothesis that we began with was that we wouldn't see changes. If I thought we'd see impacts to the local ecology at the proposed scale of the trial, we wouldn't have done the trial. I think that's a pretty safe way of thinking about it. So that's where we are. That's where we are right now.
Okay, great.
So, Mike, in the previous episode that we had, we spent some time talking about the regulatory environment that you operated under in Cornwall. Could you tell us what were the primary pertinent federal and provincial legal and regulatory framework that you operated under in Halifax?
Yeah, sure. So, what I found is that our relationships with regulators have been very, very positive and constructive. And, really the beauty of the system is that because it operates under existing limits for wastewater, there's not much that's new. Actually, there's nothing new for a regulator that's familiar with those permits and those things from a risk perspective. I think what the conversation is always about is about the benefits. And so, the benefits are new to people, and understanding the benefits of OAE from a perspective of, fisheries, or from, sort of shellfish, restoration and things like that. Some of the really exciting stuff that's coming out about co-benefits, as well as the impacts on climate change. Those are all things that are new, but the fundamental risk equation, generally speaking, is well established. I mean, I think it's well known. And so in Canada, that means, federally, you have to be compliant with Fisheries Act. No deleterious substances to fisheries, I think, is the fundamental. That's kind of a baseline. And then each province has their own permitting structure around building this kind of facility. And, we talk a lot about permitting like it's new. It's not really new, and there's nothing really new about sort of how to permit a system like this. A lot of the permits actually that we worry about have to do with the size of your tank. It's nothing to do with what you're putting in the ocean at all. And, how you build things and how you prevent spills and all of the safety kind of things that come into it. So it's really just the province has a framework for permitting in general. In a lot of cases, I think we focus a lot on, we don't have a permit for OAE specifically. One of the things I often say is, well, we also don't have a permit for a power plant. What we have is a permit around, what are the restrictions on how big something can be, how much, sort of water it can pump out, how it can modify habitat. And that's how permits are really set up. And so that's how we can integrate into the permits that are out there. We don't really need, I think, in Canada anyway, there's only 3 industries that have their own permitting, oil and gas, mining, and forestry, I believe. Everything else is under generalized permitting framework that's specific to the activity rather than, or the thing that you're doing rather than the reason that you're doing it. And so permitting has been just, follow that pathway. In the US, they've made it really clear. So the EPA has come out and sort of said, look, if you're under Clean Water Act and you're not modifying the permit of the facility you're working with, that's permitted under Clean Water Act, just let us know. Let's go. And I think that that's the right sort of approach. We don't have to relitigate what we know to be safe limits in that context.
Okay. So one final question. So we'll go from the national and the provincial to the international, right? And we're on the eve of as of our recording, the eve of the London Convention and Protocol, potentially passing a resolution that might bring ocean alkalinity enhancement, among other processes, under the rubric of both the London Protocol's amendment on marine geoengineering and the London Convention's past resolution. Do you believe that if the convention ultimately says that currently we're going to restrict activity to scientific research and require that it be subjected to the risk assessment protocol that they established in 2010, that creates major headwinds for your operations or MCDR more generally?
So I think we discussed last time on the podcast that the London Convention and London Protocol doesn't specifically and technically apply to our work because it happens onshore, and London Convention and London Protocol is an offshore sort of system. But one of the things that does happen at the London Convention and London Protocol level is that it establishes international norms. And when we establish an international norm, which sort of starts to put roadblocks in the path of doing research or developing these technologies, or who's allowed to participate in those technology developments and things like that, that's a serious challenge. We're recording, as you say, right at the end of the meeting, and so we don't have any official feedback or anything like that. But what I've been hearing is that at the most recent meeting, that the parties took a much more, what I would call, productive and science-driven approach to this issue, rather than what I would consider to be more of a philosophical approach. And what I mean by that is that, in the past, London Convention, London Protocol have sort of looked at all kinds of different pathways that have literally nothing to do with each other, right? So biological pathways, chemical pathways, sunlight reflection, and they've lumped them together under one umbrella, which is this term marine geoengineering. And as soon as you do that, you're really taking a stance that is not at all tied to the science. It's tied entirely to a philosophy. It's saying we're going to regulate. I mean, I think if you're grouping them together in terms of like, hey, this could be an interesting field for us to explore, or marine, sort of climate repair is something that we could do to help to meet our, Paris Accord Agreement goals or something like that. I mean, that's one thing. But when we're talking about a regulatory context and we're trying to talk about the risks of an approach, when we take things that really have nothing to do with each other and put them together, that's not a science-driven regulatory approach. That's really a purely philosophical approach to the issue. It's sort of like, should we or should we not remove carbon from the air, is really what you're asking yourself. And by analogy, I love this little analogy. I've been using it a lot recently. It's kind of like if we applied the same thinking to the power industry, right? And we said, look, all forms of power generation are going to have similar regulatory framework. We would be going out there stopping solar panel projects because of air pollution. And, because coal has air pollution, therefore we must sort of make sure that the risks of air pollution are well managed and measured for all solar installations. And so that doesn't make any sense, I think, at the end of the day. And I think in the same way, grouping together different pathways into one framework and trying to assess the risk across all of them when they have nothing to do with each other is also like equally challenging. So I think what's happening now is, there's this intersection at the international level of the fact that climate impacts are being felt everywhere. So climate impacts are truly being felt now in the developed world. We've seen sort of like Florida got hit really hard. We can't get home insurance in California because of wildfires anymore. Even up here in Canada, we've had, some really significant climate impacts bringing it home. And the intersection of that with, some of the things that are coming out of the UN around the emissions gap report, showing that we're still now on track for 2.6 to 3.1 degrees Celsius rise, with increased sort of impacts, and really sort of what's happening with that is that we're coming in with OAE and other sort of climate repair technologies in general, CDR in general, is coming into the public discourse. It's coming to a point where I think if you were to ask even a policymaker and elected official in the field, like even in the marine field or marine protection field, if they knew what London Convention was talking about when they talked about OAE, like you would have got blank stares as early as like a year ago or 2 years ago. And a lot of this was happening very deep down in terms of policy and things like that. And there was sort of this, as I say, philosophical perspective that was happening at the international level as a result. That conversation is changing really rapidly, where people are saying, look, like this actually matters, and maybe we should sit down and have more of a productive and science-driven approach to the whole conversation. And I'm hopeful that that's what will emerge out of the London Convention, London Protocol conversations.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting observation. I do see evolution. And one thing I'd say, get back on my soapbox about this, I think one of the things that's really important for industry to do is to actively engage with the regimes, both to understand their concerns, but also to explain the science in these regimes. If you look at Article 6 of Paris, for example, when industry engaged, you saw radical changes in terms of the evolution of how the Article 6 committee viewed CDR, in my opinion, right? And I think it's really important for the industry not to try to pretend that if they can just do their activities and nobody will see it, right? Because that doesn't happen. And I think active engagement, even though it can be painful at times and expensive, is really important. And I think some of the evolution that we're seeing in London and other regimes is partially explained by that increasing engagement, both by the scientific community and the corporate community. So I hope we see more of it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will and Mike. I think it's really important for the community to hear about your experience of really setting up this field site, because I believe it's a testament to the evolving science and the development of the field. Yeah. I think it's also a testament to the podcast lifetime that we had a whole 60 minutes to talk about, operations. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for coming on.
Thanks, Anna and Will.
Thank you.